What is up YouTube? I'm Royal, I'm rank 1 Wildrift, and in this video we're breaking down my tier list for patch 6.1b. We've had a bunch of buffs, a bunch of nerfs, and some huge changes specifically to enchanter supports, so let's get straight into it, starting with the Baron lane where we saw quite a few changes. So the main changes in the Baron lane is we saw some massive Yone buffs. Yone is no longer going to be played with his tanky build. He's going to mostly be playing crit build. If you're interested in seeing more Yone, how to build him, how to play him in the Baron lane, I did just make a video on Yone, going through every lane, how to play him. So you should definitely check that out if you want to try out Yone now that he's very, very strong again. Gnar received some slight nerfs, which will knock him out of the God tier. Same thing with the Ryze. Ryze received some late game nerfs. But he also lost some base health, which is going to make him weaker in lane, especially against these bruiser champions that just want to get on top of him and burst him. So he's also going to be leaving the God tier. Olaf received some decent buffs, which I think were more focused on jungle, but Olaf was already really strong in the Baron lane, so he's going to be one of the best Baron lane champions. And Shen received a small buff. While it's not a massive buff, his wave clear is improving. He was already a really, really strong champion in the S tier, and this buff, I believe actually pushes him into God tier, because the main weakness that Baron lane Shen had was that when he used his ultimate, the enemy Baron laner would be able to just push down his turret and just win the game and get really fed, right? But now Shen can actually clear the wave really, really fast and be able to ult to his team. So his one weakness is now improved quite a bit. So I definitely think that Shen deserves to be in the God tier, and he's also a great pick against most of these meta Baron laners. A couple other champions I want to mention is Jax. His buff was more of a quality of life buff that's going to be really, really useful if you're a good Jax player. You can now dash towards, which is going to make you a lot stronger at dodging ganks, and also increases your mobility when split pushing quite a lot. So it's a very, very nice buff for Jax, and he continues to be an S tier champion. I have included Set in the S tier. I'm not sure how big this buff is gonna end up being, and I probably should test him a little more. So I'm a little hesitant to put him into S tier, but I think he's definitely a lot better than the A tier champions. So I'm gonna put him in the S tier. Another champion I want to mention, two more champions actually in the Baron lane. I want to mention Aatrox, which while he is S tier, I think if I were to put any champion in the God tier from the S tier champions, it would probably be either Aatrox or Olaf. Olaf just doesn't have, not every matchup is great for Olaf, but pretty much every matchup is good for Aatrox. So if I were to put any champion from the S tier, the God tier would be Aatrox. So it's definitely a champion that you should keep your eyes on. And the other, actually, we should probably talk about Yasuo too. Yasuo's tank build is no longer a possibility, or it's not strong. And I did debate putting him in B tier for my Baron lane tier list. You'll see where I have him placed in mid lane, but I think he's really weak in the Baron lane now because he's forced to build damage, and he can easily be one-shot by most of these champions. I completely forgot to talk about Nasus. I guess there's so many champions to talk about in the Baron lane. Let's talk about Garen first. Garen is still very similar strength, but now you just play him tank. But the thing is, he's not as strong as the other tank champions like Ornn and Shen. He doesn't provide as much to a team. I think he's an alright option, but he did lose what made him strong, which was his AD build. So I definitely can't put him higher than A tier. And Nasus, which was a God tier champion in the previous patch, has now dropped to A tier. I saw a lot of people question how big the nerfs are. In my opinion, the nerfs are quite substantial. And I wasn't a big believer in Nasus before the buffs. A lot of people were saying that he was already strong. I thought he was like average, and I think now he's like average towards weak. I definitely think that he's a great noob stomper, so if you're playing him in lower elo, he'll still be a good pick. But overall, I think there's way better champions that you can pick over Nasus, and I think he has too many bad matchups now in the early game to justify putting him in S tier or higher. Moving on to the jungle, we of course have the newest champion, Nocturne, which I decided to put into God tier, which of course he'll be joined by a Mumu. There's so many good junglers right now, and after Amumu got slightly nerfed, right? Amumu received nerfs this patch. I still think he retained his god tier, but the distance between him and every other jungler is not that big anymore. Last patch, I changed god tier's name to Amumu tier because he was just so much better than every other champion. But now the gap is pretty close. I still think Amumu is the best jungler in the game. Nocturne is slightly behind him, and then right behind him is these other top tier junglers like the Lilia, like the Nunu, the Jarvan and Violet received some small buffs, the Olaf that received some very nice buffs, of course the Lee Sin if you're a god on Lee Sin. And another new champion in the S tier is also Evelynn, a champion that had I think neither B or C tier, however she received a massive buff. Her first ability got a 10% AP scaling, and now you're gonna be like, oh, that's not that big of a buff, 10% AP scaling, so if I have 500 AP, it's gonna be doing, what, 50 more damage? That's not that much. But what you have to keep in mind is that Evelynn spams this ability. This ability has like no cooldown, so Evelynn keeps spamming and doing an insane amount of damage. It increases her burst by 50, but increases her consistent damage by a lot. And her ultimate cooldown being lowered is actually a pretty substantial buff too, because in the previous patch, I think 2 or 3 patches ago, her ulti damage was buffed in the early game. So her ulti actually does a lot of damage even in the early game. You can look for one-shots very early on with your ganks. So buffing the cooldown of it on an ability that's so broken, I think is going to have a great early game impact. I think she'll be able to get her early game snowballing happening a lot quicker, and now she's a massive threat in the late game with the AP scaling buffs. So I did make an Evelynn video as well this patch a few days ago, feel free to check that out, where I'm showing you the strength of Evelynn and how strong her snowball can be and how oppressive it can be, because I'm playing with a teammate that's running it down. They're like 0-16, right? But I'm still able to contest the game because of how strong Evelynn's snowball can be and how strong the champion can be when ahead. I've pushed up Poppy into the A tier, which she did receive some buffs in the jungle. And of course, Yone is also going to be joining the A tier after his buffs, even though I don't think he's that good in the jungle. I'm kind of hesitant to even put him in A tier. I feel like a lot of these champions in A tier are stronger than him. Zinzara also received a small buff, but it's a placebo buff. It's not very substantial, so I can't really increase his spot. Nasus is going to drop all the way down C tier. I'm probably going to remove him from the jungle tier list. I don't think many people play him jungle, but I wanted to show how weak he is now in the jungle after the changes. Let's look at mid lane, where I didn't put any champions in God tier, but if I'm being honest, all the champions in S tier probably deserve to be in God tier. There's just no champion right now that's a click above the rest, in my opinion. I think out of all these mages, Syndra is probably the strongest, but it's not by much. All of these mages like Annie, Orianna, Syndra, Ziggs, Morgana, Ahri, Vex, who recently received buffs, Veigar, Ryze, even Swain deserve to be in the God tier. And of course, from non-mage champions, the recently buffed Yone. I think mid lane is actually one of the better roles for him, especially with fleet footwork. Again, check out my Yone video if you want to see me play him and explain more about him. And of course, Kassadin, who's the anti-mage champion. In terms of the A tier champions, I guess all of them should be in S tier right now, but all of them are really strong as well, and they're all great picks. I just don't really want to put a bunch of champions in the God tier. In the God tier, I usually put a few champions that are just substantially better than the rest, but it doesn't really seem to be the case in mid lane. After the mage buffs, every mage feels so strong and oppressive, and the non-mage champions that I think are really good right now have either been OP for a while, like Echo or Kassadin, or are just really good counters to mages like Zed. And of course, Yone, who just recently got buffed. The other non-mage champions, I just consider them too weak. Champions like Akali, Akshan, Jace, I think can't really keep up with these mages. Diana, Katarina, Talon, Fizz, Lucian, all of these champions I just don't think they can keep up. And now Yasuo joins the list of champions that can't keep up because he got completely nerfed on his tank build, which I thought was his best build. And he's gonna be downgraded down to B tier because his crit build, he's just too squishy. All these mages can one-shot him way too easily. His early game got nerfed. I don't think he's in a great spot right now because I thought crit Yasuo was already kind of weak, even though they did buff it. I don't think that will be enough. However, you can kind of think of this tier list as all the S tier champions should be God tier, all the A tier champions should be in the S tier. I just don't like, putting too many champions in God tier. And Rise, who also received some nerfs, I still think is one of the best mages. And I'm sure we're gonna start seeing Rise's win rate drop because Rise is actually hard to play. He was just overwhelmingly OP. But usually Rise is gonna be one of those champions that doesn't retain a super high win rate. However, he will always be strong. A champion that I've heard a lot of fuzz about, Aurelion Sol, I think is a decent champion. However, when I compare him to these other tier 1 mages, like the Syndra, like the Ziggs, I just don't think that he can keep up for most of the game. And while yes, he does scale like a monster, especially after the Rallies buffs, I just don't see how he can keep up in the early and mid game with these other mages that would rather have an S/God tier. Moving on to the ADCs, we've had no real changes, right? I'm pretty sure this patch didn't really impact ADCs at all. The only impact that we did see was a bit of a shift in the support meta. However, I don't think that's really gonna change the strength of any ADCs. I could be wrong. Obviously, champions like Samira might benefit a little more from these enchanter nerfs, since Samira likes to play with these like go-in champions, these engaged champions. However, overall, I don't think that there's any big changes. Corki has somehow dodged the nerf hammer once again, so he'll continue to be the God tier champion. And of course, the S tier champions continue to be great second choices. Ezreal, if you're a great ADC player, can be absolutely insane. Varus, of course, is the premier supportive poke, high damage ADC as compared to Jhin and Ashe, who are right below him. Misfortune, of course, with her ultimate can wreak havoc. And of course, the utility you get from Sivir as your ADC because of her ultimate is also insane. Your hyper carry ADCs, other than Ezreal, Xayah and Vayne are your go-tos, and every other ADC is just a little too weak in my opinion right now. But now let's move on to the supports. Finally, let's look at the supports where we didn't see many direct buffs or nerfs. We did see some nice buffs to Alistar, who I think is a great engaged champion after those buffs. He can have his crowd control a lot longer and really impact fights, right? His first ability is almost like a Malphite ulti, so being able to have that on a lower cooldown does make a huge difference. However, the main changes were on the support items. The support items, the enchanter ones, have been completely hard nerfed. So enchanters have gone from being extremely OP to being just decent. The champions that got hit the most are the ones that relied on those items heavily, like the Janna, like the Sona, like the Soraka. The champions that didn't rely too heavily on them, like the Seraphine, right? Seraphine cares more about ability haste, because her abilities are so OP, she just wants to keep using her abilities, right? Her second ability, her third ability, and her ultimate. So she didn't get hit as hard as other enchanter supports, but she's also going to be leaving the God tier. Karma, of course, doesn't really care because she can build AP. And Millie and Lulu, again, these champions are they don't really care about items as much. They just care about getting ability haste, which they can still easily get with their builds because their abilities are so OP. This is also kind of giving ground to more aggressive enchanter supports, like Nami, in my opinion, that can build a little more aggressive. I think she's going to be a little better than the other more defensive supports. Braum, obviously, I think is a lot better with the new redemption, kind of the change redemption. But also, Braum struggles a lot against these enchanter supports. So now that you're going to be seeing a lot more Maokai, Alistar, Leona, Nautilus, Braum is a counter to all those picks. So I think he will also benefit a lot from these changes. But of course, in the God tier, I'm going to have to put Maokai, who is one of the most consistent, good, engaged supports. He's been going under the radar for a while now, but now that the enchanter supports are gonna be slowly leaving us, or at least not being as meta-defining, I think this is finally the opening for champions like Maokai to shine. Of course, if you're a beast on Pyke, Pyke continues to be the best hyper carry support. If you like other engaged supports, Blitzcrank, Nautilus, and Alistar now with the buffs will be very strong. Set, I've been finally included in my support tier list because I think these buffs actually make Set support somewhat good. These Set buffs, I feel like they were more targeted for support than anything else, honestly, and B might be a little too low. Maybe it should be in the A tier. So if you do enjoy playing Set support, this is finally the patch to do it on. Thank you so much for watching my tier list. If you have any opinions, keep them to yourself. I'm just joking. If you have any opinions, please drop them down in the comments. I love discussing the meta with you guys. I feel like it gives me a better perspective on the meta, knowing what other people think is really strong. So please comment down below, and while you're there, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more Wild Rift content.